The good thing is that we have a really cool person of interest. He's one of my favorite people on island because I call him the steward of the island, because him and I think some of your family members too have been very instrumental in just kind of keeping an eye out for St. Croix. You do things, you try to teach people how to do things to preserve this, because this is all we have. So welcome, John Farchette III.
Thank you. It's a privilege. I appreciate the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I just had to have you as our person of interest because you just have a wealth of information and just so much to share. And you already do it in your day job, you know, what you do for the National Park Service. Not National Park, DPNR, sorry. Yeah, can't mix those two up. And but tell us about you. Like, what made you suddenly become aware that this is Mother Earth and you had to be a part of taking care of her?
I think it's a lot is because of my father, his desire to go fishing and be out on the shorelines of St. Croix. And then, of course, through just being there, you learn. But more important, you develop a affinity for the pulse of the wave as it's coming in, and it's moving you, and you're having to correct it just so you can stand up. Looking under the water was I think, was the culmination, was the point that I realized that there's a whole new world that we don't see, and that we just take for granted that it's there, and it'll always be there. We're now finding out that that's not the case. Actually, there is some serious repercussions that we have a part that we've played. Man, it doesn't matter where he goes, he leaves a mark, and when he does, and it depends on what toy he has at the time,
yes, you said toy,
can rip it and destroy thousands of years of a system that was working incredibly well. We don't understand, like a hillside is what's called a watershed, and it's trees, shrubs, and grass. And those trees, shrubs, and grass do what we haven't been able to do, which is control water, which is the strongest element known to man. Nothing stands up against water. The Grand Canyon was formed by the Colorado River and over years, and when you stand on the ridge, that was flat ground at one time. It's 4,000 feet down now because water cut through rock to get there. So once water can move, there's no stopping it. But those trees, shrubs, and grass in our hillsides have done what we can't do, which is tame, diffuse the energy of water by breaking up just one drop of rain. But, of course, all drops of rain that touch a tree and touch a limb get broken up, and then it goes down to the shrub, and then it goes down to the grass. And because that grass is there, water has no choice but to infiltrate into the ground.
And not flood someone's house and send it down the hill.
Not go down the hill at a rapid rate. And once it moves, that's when it can transport. And that's as simple as, again, something we take for granted. And the first thing we do when we buy a piece of land is call a bulldozer and tell you, take down the trees, the shrubs, and the grass. And it's bare. And in some cases, it's been done just to highlight the property so that they can sell it.
Well, we saw that what happened years ago, and I still blame whoever cut the road in the rainforest, because remember when we had that big heavy rain in Frederickstead where the woman died? That was all cleared land, and it came down through that gut. That road is right across from that main gut. So I still blame whoever did that, because first of all, that road wasn't cut properly, in my opinion. I'm not an engineer, but I saw the consequences of it when we had that big rain.
Right. And we take for granted the fact that, there's a microscopic plant in the ocean that produces 50% of the oxygen we breathe. We owe that one cell plant that we cannot see with our bare eyes. We need a microscope to see it. Actually produces 50% of the oxygen for the planet.
You're
of
kidding.
The 19.2% that's in the ocean, that's in the atmosphere, and it's phytoplankton.
You're kidding.
No.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Farsh, you and your family has been here for I can't even begin to count how many years, and I know you will have just a passion for not just St. Croix but for the Virgin Islands, and the family's fingerprints are all over this place. I know because I've studied the history, but people don't even know. I mean, CHaRLi introduced us, Mr. Farchette, but tell us a little bit about your family, man. I want to hear some stuff about that. And where
I was born here. My father was John James Farchette Jr., and my mother was Anna Aloyo. And she was born in Vieques, so I'm half Puerto Rican. And my grandfather came from Maddaloni, Italy. He arrived through Ellis Island, registered. Mm-hmm. So did his father before him. And he grew up in Syracuse, New York, and joined the Marines, and they sent him here. And that's what that emblem is, the 54th Company. He was part of that
oh, you're
that
kidding.
group.
Okay.
With that emblem in Gallows Bay.
Right.
That was the barracks. And he fell in love with Elaine Lovegren, whose mother was Emmeline Schuster. And the Schusters arrived here in 1734 with Mott. He was the architect at Christiansted from Denmark. They were German, the Schusters were, emigrated to Denmark and befriended the monarchy because back in 1734, that was the only way you could get here was that you had to be friends with them. Mm-hmm. And so then, of course, my mother's ancestors greeted Columbus. So I've had this love of pre-Columbian history that I enjoy. I'm fascinated by the colonial history, but it's only 500 years old compared to the history of St. Croix. And
St. Croix as we know it.
St. Croix as we know it.
Right.
It was born 134 million years ago in the late Cretaceous period. It actually started rising off the ocean floor about the end of the Jurassic period and the beginning of the Cretaceous period, which is an incredible amount of time. And it came above water born of the ocean. It was not volcanic. It was just a floor that came up because of tectonic plate subduction that occurred and forced St. Croix up into the above sea level by the Galapagos Island, west of Ecuador. Oh, and then it entered what we call today the Atlantic Basin, which is now the Caribbean Sea. And it's still moving an inch a year to the east and still rising out of the ocean.
That blows my mind because I live up there in Mary's Fancy, up on the hill up there. Mm-hmm. And there are times I'm in the yard digging stuff, and I'll find coral.
Yeah.
In my yard, Charlene.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you're high.
Yeah, I'm up in the hills.
Mm-hmm. And there's no reason for that other than that it was below water at one point.
Exactly.
Seawater.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's alcaliche in Mary's Fancy.
Right.
It's a marine clay. It's not a terrestrial
That's what I recognize.
Oh, caliche is marine clay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
That's why it's white.
Oh,
it's from the calcium carbonate that's found within it.
Absolutely.
You are kidding
I figured that out myself, yeah.
I did not know that because I'm like, we have a lot of caliche here.
All of it underwater. Yes, yeah.
Ooh.
It's fascinating.
So during the Miocene period, which is closer to us, St. Croix, just the tops of East End Ridge and the West End North Side Ridge were sticking out. So it looked like two islands. It looked like two keys.
Wow.
But it's because the rest of it hadn't raised up yet. Mm-hmm. And it raised so high up that in the southwest quadrant, it's 9 miles out, was land. It's all covered today. But on the north side, it was because of there's a break, there's a drop-off. Uh-huh. There was actually a river that ran probably with two tributaries, one from the gut for Waragut, which comes down by Basin Triangle, and then the one for Golden Rock. Mm-hmm. So that watershed and those two watersheds linked together in the bay and snaked. So a river
from
meanders
north to south?
From south to north.
South to north.
And then went over the edge at the Gallows Bay or the harbor entrance. Mm-hmm. And as it gets deep, you can see that the waterfall actually was breaking and accreting like all waterfalls do. So it was above water 12,000 years ago. All of that was land.
Wow.
So all that's
They
submerged.
always
You can
talk
walk
about
to Buck
rivers.
Island and Green Key.
What?
Yeah. We're talking. It looked like on the north side. It looked like
Right.
Hams Bluff,
Right.
where it's just a sheer wall.
That's
Wow.
fascinating stuff.
Wow.
So between us and Vieques
Uh-huh.
is 12,400 feet deep. That's the Virgin Islands Basin.
Mm-hmm.
Right off of Vieques, I mean right off of Vieques, there's a drop off.
Yeah, a drop.
10,000 feet straight down.
Yeah.
And it was the site of the 1867 tsunami. It was caused by a piece of that wall that
Dropping
fell,
off. Oh,
displaced
that's
water, and
what
that caused a
happened.
tsunami to come to Frederiksted. So we have to pay attention when you look at USGS
Right, what's
alerts.
going on that side?
It's where, if it's off of Vieques, we need to pay special attention because there seems to be some weakness in that wall that causes that. And Vieques is steps away geologically from becoming Atlantis.
Steps away. It can happen any day.
It could happen any day, or it could happen in the next 1,000 years. But I mean, I'm talking less than a mile offshore.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, if you look at it on Google Earth, you can see it.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a sheer wall just right off of Vieques. I mean, literally right off of Vieques.
I know you learn something new every day, don't you? With him, I always do. Because, they actually talked about, and I found this article again the other day, was where they think they discovered like a full civilization, including pyramids, in the Caribbean basin. And they stopped talking about it. But I just found the old article. I love that I posted stuff on Facebook years ago, and you got the memories, and it comes up, and I'm like, oh. And you go do the research again, and you see that, yeah, there was such an article. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more with Let's Talk Friday with Charlene Springer and our lovely guest, John Farchette. Take care. We'll be right back.
I grant my clemency from prisons of my mind. I'll walk right through the gate.
Welcome back. You're listening to Let's Talk Friday with Charlene Springer, and we've got as our co-host today, Dr. Marlon Williams.
Yeah, loving it.
And we are enjoying this conversation with our person of interest this morning, John Farchette III. And he is giving us, like this, as always, this wealth of information about the islands and how they came about. Because I even had an argument with a guy on the plane because he was talking about how St. Croix is volcanic. And I'm like, look, we are not volcanic. We are one of the 3 islands in the Caribbean that is pushed up. And I think it's Bird Island and Jamaica, right? That is actually mountains. We came up from the sea. We were not volcanic. And he was looking at me like really weird, like mad at me. And I'm like, why are you telling people this? Tell them the true story. And I learned that from you. So thank you, John.
Well, it wasn't me. It's, during the 70s, it was West Indies Lab.
All right.
They a lot of geologists came as part of that thing, as well as marine biologists. Some of them stayed, but it was a man named D.K. Hubbard. He was a geologist. To this day, he still comes and does cores of the ocean floor, still refining his findings. And he did cores all over St. Croix, as well as several others, Wetton, and a man named Speed, and also Love was another one. So these are geologists that basically determined why they said what they said about St. Croix. Mm-hmm. And it was them who proved that St. Croix was an uplift. The fact that we have caliche as part of our soil system, one of the oldest soils, by the way, globally.
Wow.
It's and the fact that we were such a small island, we have geophysical properties of a continent. When you look at what it is that we're finding here, our sedimentary rock, which is formed in a lake bed from sediments being placed on top of each other, so it makes like a wafer. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that wafering, you can see when you look at it from an elevation point. And our sedimentary rock, of course, heat, pressure, then makes that into a rock. that sediment. Our sedimentary rock is in the vertical position. So sedimentary rocks are made in a horizontal position because that's the only way sediment can drop out of water, of a water column.
Right.
So we have what's called turbidite. And turbidite is a soil or a rock that's formed by moving water, fast-moving water. So the turbidity in the water, if you have these layers laying on top of each other in a method that is constant and non-static, and it just keeps dropping, and it makes a very good solid rock. Mm-hmm. But turbidite is a fractured, and it fractures easy because it was never in that regime of soil accumulation. So it was a very upsetting, a very moving constantly. Mm-hmm. So this happened, and so that's why we have turbidite, and that's what most of that what they call rotten rock is turbidite. And
it crumbles pretty easily.
It crumbles pretty easily. It shatters. Yeah. We have 33 tremors a month in our region, and that tends to break up turbidite. And
that's why they say people's house is settling, but it's really the turbidite at the bottom.
Well, it's it depends on where you are. If you didn't build your house on solid rock, your house will continue to settle because during an earthquake the ground shakes and moves so rapidly. In a 7 to 8 on the Richter scale, which we can get up to 8 and change. On the Richter scale, that's the ability we have. That's the 12 faults between us and St. Thomas.
That scares you, Charlie? Look at your face.
So that moves the ground 20 feet in 3 seconds and snaps back to where it was.
Whoa.
But the shaking that occurs liquefies dirt and ground. And if it's not solid rock, anything that has any weight to it will sink into the ground. So areas like if you're on the beach in Jamaica, I believe there was a horrible earthquake. I'm not quite sure of the year, but when the shaking stopped, the folks that were near the shoreline were up to their neck and had died, had expired.
Because the soil had liquefied and they trapped them.
They just fell in,
like quicksand.
Wow.
And then, of course, your last breath, that's as much as your diaphragm will open again, so you can't take a breath. So they actually died from asphyxiation.
Whoa.
And getting crushed when the shaking
when
stopped.
It snapped back, yeah.
And it stopped shaking, the ground solidified again, and then, of course, that would crush your...
No, listen, for a listening audience, we don't want to scare you. Just give you some information.
It's a reality. It's something that we
don't really talk about it because there's tsunami, but what do we really have as far as earthquake preparedness?
It's actually the same as hurricane, having lots of water. So don't get rid of your water after hurricane season. Mm-hmm. Don't get rid of your non-perishable goods. Keep them, change them out. Continue doing the preparation.
Right.
Having a plan with your family where you're going to meet if you're separated.
Right.
It's in your home. It's about anchoring everything, making sure it doesn't come falling down on you. It's also understanding the dynamics of what would occur in your home, and looking at your home and looking to where you can harden it, especially in your rafters, and putting in ties and putting in. I think the Danish had a great one for the hip roofs was that they put a large timber between the eaves, and that would lock it, and then they would tie it to the center beam as well, and then that actually keeps. So if the roof falls, it falls at one piece,
right? Not
a piece coming down on it and the other piece coming down on it. So it would stay in most cases up. I believe also during that what they found after earthquakes, the work that people do as responders and all that, and the engineers look at the structure and where was the safest place where they found people was in corners. They call it the triangle of life, which is the corner of the building that
get as close into that corner as you can.
How often again do we have earthquakes here?
We have them every month. We have tremors, which are around 2.5 to 4 max.
Max 4, yeah.
4.1. But that's a good thing.
Yeah, because it means
that means that
I worry when you don't
being
see
relieved,
it. Yeah.
as opposed to if what I fear the most is when I look at the map. Because in telecast.com you can actually there's a layer which you can put the earthquakes on, and it'll show it like buckshot on a target, and you'll see where all the spots are. Yeah. And how it comes up.
There's Quake Watch if you do
Quake
an
Watch,
app.
right.
So this is what's going on right now. Yeah.
I get a USGS alert almost every time there's one.
Yeah.
Right. So you can change the settings. So it's good to know. The one that I always look out for is actually, and sorry we're going away from this, but you're here. So we can ask you. The one off of the Canary Islands. They always say that's the one, that's the big one. So that's the one we got to watch out for.
Well, that's actually a volcano that has chambers in the walls of the volcano. So it was like air gaps that occurred. And so those gaps now are filling up with water. And the danger in that from rain, of course, so those become aquifers, and they become cells that are full of water. And the danger is that they have a magma event where it's coming up through the existing volcano. What happens is, of course, is that water expands under heat. So the magma would heat up that water that's inside the walls of the volcano, and that would cause it to expand. And once it expands, it would the wall would collapse. And because of its proximity to the shoreline, that collapse going into the water would cause a tsunami that would take about 90 minutes to get to us. Because we're
Isn't that incredible? Across the Atlantic in 90 minutes.
Because it's traveling at 500 miles an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, really? Yeah. Across the Atlantic in 90 minutes.
So it's...
that's like so wrong. That is so wrong.
Well.
Yeah. Well... What a way to go.
You can't run from it.
You can get as high as you can. But, they're like,
high,
you have a 500-foot wall of water coming. There's really not much you can do, right?
No.
I think we're only looking at 30 to 100 for us.
And how high is Blue Mountain?
That's at Blue Mountain, somewhere around 800 feet above sea level, currently.
It's still growing.
Maybe it went up a little higher. Yeah. We could pray for that, right?
And in Blue Mountain, you can actually find rutus, which is a bivalve clam that was extinct 36 million years ago. And it's in the wall. It's in the rock. The fossil is. And that tells you how old and how deep St. Croix was when she started her rise, which was 2,000 feet below sea level.
Below sea level.
Below sea level. Which is what all the geologists have now through the papers. This is how these guys got their PhDs, was these were challenged and peer reviewed, and so it's fact. It's a scientific fact now.
So now, when you actually had a finding, are you ready to talk about that yet? Because you found some things, pre-Columbian things here on St. Croix.
Right. I went fishing one day and and I wanted to find a shortcut. Because I wanted to get there quick, and I wanted my car close, so I could at least keep an eye on it. And I found myself on a cliff, and I sat down. When I sat down, I put my hand on an uneven rock, and it didn't feel right. And the reason it didn't feel right was because it was not flat or jagged or otherwise, which is what you expect when you put your hand down, sit down. And it was done in relief, so it had very round. And so I stood up and I looked at it, and I couldn't quite figure it out. And then when I actually oriented myself from what it was a rock carving called a petroglyph.
Right.
And I was excited. I was jumping up for joy. I couldn't believe this thing because it was looking back at me.
Wow.
And so I went and got somebody who knew more about it than I did. A gentleman that was a surveyor by the name of Gary Bourdon, and he came to see the rock carving. And so what he's talking about, he says, normally there's more than one.
Oh, and, you're kidding! When you see one,
yeah, when you see one, he says they're very rarely all by themselves. So he had me. So while he's doing his drawings, and he says, and I can't tell you it's a petroglyph, but I know somebody who can. So I started looking around, and I looked all over the rock, nearly fell off the cliff, and that was enough for me. And so I went back to where he was, and I looked around the corner, and there was another one.
Oh.
So it was. So then a Caribbean archaeologist who actually had done work in Puerto Rico on petroglyphs, took her 2 years to get here, but she finally did, and she did a survey, an archaeological survey, and authenticated both of them.
Whoa.
One was dated at 800 AD, and the second one was 1200 AD. And so it was significant in St. Croix's prehistory.
Right.
Because it wasn't for a lack of looking. They knew petroglyphs were here. The only ones we had encountered before then was in 1923 when Goodman Hott found ceremonial ball court, the only ceremonial ball court in the Lesser Antilles.
I think they should send it back.
In Salt River. And he took the slabs to Denmark. And back then, we didn't have a cultural resource historic preservation office. It was pretty loose stuff, but he nonetheless, it was a discovery, and he did document it. And they're still preserved. They're in very good care.
They could send it back.
They could. Denmark has a policy, which I tend to agree with. When Greenland asked for their Viking stuff back, they justified it, saying that when the Vikings arrived in Greenland, they may have been from Denmark, but once they grew up here and had children here, they were Greenlanders.
Oh, Lord. Lord, Harry. You see how they do?
Politics.
We're going to take a quick commercial break. You're listening to Let's Talk Friday with Charlene Springer. We'll be right back. Let's Talk Friday with Charlene Springer and Dr. Marlon Williams co-hosting.
Hanging out.
Yep, and we've got in the studio with us our person of interest, John Farchette III, who is always, as I said, a wealth of information. And we were talking about, of course, the ball court. I always have an issue with that. And I always want them to send it back. But as you talked earlier, that, it's a logistic and a money thing, which we don't have either. But it's there, and, maybe they can just mark it off and say, well, the real stuff is over there. We can make a fake version of it, since, you see that in Mexico all the time. They just make fake versions of what was originally there.
And a lot of museums do that, just in case someone might want to take the stuff that's on display. And it can be done now. We have the technology to be able to do that with 3D printers.
Right.
And be able to cast a replica of whatever it is using a
because they still
scanner.
Haven't really gone through that whole area. Salt River hasn't been discovered
yet.
Per se.
Although we know quite a bit,
Yeah.
and it's been extensive. But I still believe that we haven't
There's a lot
scratched the
more
surface
there.
yet. There's a lot more there because it's an alluvial plain. So dirt came over dirt. So any migration is still buried. So we haven't gotten to the first people that were inhabiting Salt River yet.
Wow.
And we have a carbon date reading on St. Croix of 3240 BC.
What?
Over by Manning's Bay, was discovered while
Where's
they were
Manning's Bay?
That's Restruck.
Okay.
So that bay in front there is called Manning's Bay, and so it's pre-ceramic, before they made ceramics. And it was the University of Georgia who did the carbon date reading. They couldn't believe it, so they did a second one, got 2,500, which confirmed the 3240.
Right.
And it was done inconsequential. In other words, it had nothing to do with what they were doing. It just happened to be a feature that they saw in the property when they were doing the archaeological survey for the Betty's Hope plantation that was there. They were going
Hess, basically. Hess is Betty's Hope, isn't it? Or just on the other side of Hess?
No, it's right next to the racetrack, right in front of the airport. All that is Betty's Hope.
Okay.
So when they discovered that, it was just as part of a different dig.
Okay.
But once I discovered the petroglyphs, I couldn't stop grabbing as much as I could to read as much as I could about the pre-Columbian history of St. Croix. And having all this information come out, I mean, I was surprised as to how much work had been done. And that the work is already done. We know so much about the people who discovered Columbus, because he was lost. and
Poor guy.
I love it.
And tried to come ashore, and I had a big argument with someone with that.
he
with
never came
Columbus.
on shore in St. Croix.
See, I knew it. And this woman kept trying to argue with me, and I'm
kept-
like, lady, no, he didn't. Okay, yeah. Okay.
He had dysentery from Guadalupe.
Oh, okay.
The water there.
Uh-huh.
And, it wasn't good.
Okay.
He never came out of his cabin. If he saw St. Croix, it was through a window.
Oh, okay.
And
good.
apparently that's where he said, he named the Holy Cross, Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
And then he looked, and it's written in the Chronicles that they saw islands to the north, and that's when they headed north. And that's when he took back his ship, because from Guadalupe to St. Croix, he never was in control of his ship. It was the people he picked up in Guadalupe that said, we are Borinquen. We're not from here. They brought us here. They see them people running, that they brought us here. So we want to go back, and I'll show you the way back, and we'll stop along the way and get some water. And so they stopped in St. Croix. And so they brought them to St. Croix.
Wow.
So they had never seen St. Croix.
He didn't discover nothing.
No. But then once they saw islands to the north, they took
story.
back the ship and they headed north.
Okay.
And that's when he saw so many keys and so many islands that it was as many as Ursula's Virgins, and that's where the Virgin Islands name comes from.
Oh, okay.
And as he approached Puerto Rico, the folks he picked up in Guadalupe jumped off ship and swam to shore, and they just let him go. And they already know that the next island would be Dominican Republic, which is what he was trying to get back to, because he had left a contingent there. Fort Navidad, on Christmas Day, the Santa Maria had sank from the first voyage, and he left a contingency of folks who could not fit on the other two, the Pinta or the Santa Maria. What was it? Nina. They couldn't get all the stuff on there, so they left some there. But they were all already slaughtered. They had already been killed by the natives. And so we actually hold the distinction of the first encounter with the Europeans, or at least where the first battle occurred. Chronically, we got that. Where a woman...
I knew it'd be a woman. I knew it would be a woman. I knew it.
Just made Charlene's day, man. Just made
a woman fired an arrow and struck a Spaniard in his escudo, which is a wooden shield that he wore like a bulletproof vest. It wasn't arrow-proof. And it barely cut him, but it was dipped in and rubbed into manganese. So he died from anaphylactic shock.
See?
A couple days later.
I knew it. I
too many
knew it.
histamines in his body.
You just made my day.
Okay, Sean, we get it.
And it shows that the folks that greeted Columbus were matriarchal. So they were.
See?
They were run by women. It was not necessarily run by women, but they followed a woman's agenda.
Right.
Right. So the Cajinagos, or the Caribs, were patriarchal. So they used women as commodities. They would trade them and the Taínos never did that. They would never do that. Because they venerated women.
This is about family. It
was always
keeps
about
the family unit
correct.
together.
It was that thought, that society choice that they made, was really what provided them the longevity that they lasted so long, because it was about everybody working together, security, abundance of food, procreation, and of course security.
Right, and not going off. It's so funny. I just did an interview with Max Dashu, who has done the suppressed women's archives, and she was talking about that. The difference between a matriarchal society is where, the woman will have a child, but she will never. She'll get married and have a child, but she will not get married, get together with someone and have a kid, but not go off with his tribe. She would stay with her tribe, and the kid stays with her tribe too. So you never have the sense of I'm a stranger in someone else's land kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You'll always be amongst your tribe. So and that worked, because then it protected everyone. And the same thing you're talking about. And her studies have come up and showed, like, throughout society, and these are all the suppressed archives, because this is not in your history books, where they talk about women being, and those are usually the medicine women, They were usually the ones that went out and started the fights. Because they were like, this is wrong. How can you do this? And they were usually the leaders in all these revolutions.
Warriors. My mom was a full-blooded Carib out of St. Vincent. Mm-hmm. My mother was half-blooded. And you're right, because in all these villages, the women were the one who actually controlled the dynamics of the day. Mm-hmm. I want to know how do you... Or are you?
Oh wait! First, we have to say this. You are a part of, and you're one of the founders of the St. Croix Archaeological Society.
I'm one of the first ones that got together to try and do this. We needed a place that we could display this history.
Right.
It doesn't compete with our colonial history. I think it complements our colonial history. The St. Croix Archaeological Society was founded in 2001, and it's still today. We have a working board. Mr. David Hayes, registered professional archaeologist. He's our chairman, and he's been crucial and instrumental in the. We're going to host the International Association of Caribbean Archaeologists in 2017, in July 22nd to the 29th, I believe. And that is all the Caribbean archaeologists from all these countries, over 250 people, who are going to hold their conference for the first time in the Virgin Islands, for the first time in St. Croix. And so it's going to be
incredible.
Awesome. Oh, yeah, it's probably going to be
And outsiders can come, right?
Absolutely. It's about that's what it's
there,
all about.
All
it's
the
about
days.
These folks want people to know what it is that they're doing. If not, they do it in
So we ready to rewrite history
otherwise.
books and tell the truth now? I mean,
Well, the archaeologists do who, what, where, and when. So they don't.
It's
they
not
don't
about
choose
making up things.
The history they report what they've seen, what they found, and it's in some cases very boring. But if you really pay attention, it actually paints the picture for you.
Yeah.
It's proof. It's evidence.
Yeah.
You can't argue with it.
Yeah. John, I love when you come. Are you going to come back and visit us again?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So our lovely, incredible, I love it, person of interest, John Farchette III. Thank you so much for being here with us. An honor and a privilege to have you grace us with your presence.
Privilege has been all mine.
Oh, man. We love you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, man.
We'll be right back. You're listening to Let's Talk Friday with Charlene Springer.